This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I am your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. My guest today is a professor of history and gender studies at MIT, specializing in Armenian and Turkish history. She is now in Israel to participate in an international conference held at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, marking the centennial of the Treaty of Lausanne that was meant to settle the conflicts emerging from the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire and its subsumption by the Turkish Republic. Her talk at the conference is entitled A Case of Post-Genocide Partition Denied, Armenian Demands for a National Home at the Lausanne Conference. Her book, Recovering Armenia, The Limits of Belonging in Post-Genocide Turkey, appeared in 2016 and was published by Stanford University Press. I'm now delighted to welcome here in the studio Professor Lerna Ekmekcioglu. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So at the Lausanne Conference, that is 1922-1923, calls were made for the establishment of a national home for Armenians within the nascent Turkish Republic in the aftermath of a genocide. To anyone familiar with the history of Zionism, this would sound eerily familiar. So what was really the nature of these demands for a national home?
Mm-hmm. Actually, this is a reduced and reducted version of the demand for some type of a self-governing body for the Armenians. So in the aftermath of the genocide and the aftermath of the armistice that the Ottoman Empire signed with the Allied powers, a defeated Ottoman Empire signing the armistice in October 1918, afterwards, Armenians asked for a real self-governing country, a possible nation state, possibly a mandate, where they would go settle to congregate, to be safe from violence from the perpetrators that are next door, and have a kind of a greater Armenia. That's what they called it. They did present it as a promised land of some sort. And they had some support up until 1920, from 1918 to 20.
International support, that is.
Yes, allied British support, the French support. The victors of the war aligned their interests with the victims of the genocide simply because the Ottomans were defeated.
So it was meant to be an autonomous region within the Turkish Republic?
Originally it wasn't going to be an autonomous region. It was supposed to be. What the demand, Armenian secessionist demand, was that this is only after the genocide. Before the genocide, they don't ask for this. They ask different things, not autonomous, but reforms, for instance, within the Ottoman Empire. But after 1915, they don't think they can coexist anymore. And they asked for this sovereign land. And the British are supportive, the French are supportive originally, and the Americans are very supportive in the first 2 years after the armistice, to the point that a treaty is signed in August 1920 called the Sèvres Treaty, where there is it's the dismemberment of Anatolia Treaty, where a part was going to be an Armenia, whose borders were going to be demarcated by Woodrow Wilson. The American president, that was called Wilsonian Armenia. But things have shifted because of the successful Kemalist, what is now called the Turkish War of Independence, to the point that by the time that they all convene at Lausanne, Armenians have this dwindled type of a demand that is called Armenian National Home, which is an autonomous
And the new
region.
Turkish government had renounced on the previous agreements in Sèvres, and
yes,
there was a need to find a new solution for the Armenian question, the Armenian problem. But I want to
Sure.
see what it really entailed, because what we're talking about is a region which would concentrate the Armenian population within Turkey, sort of a separation of powers, a separation of populations. Is that what they were demanding?
At Lausanne,
Mm-hmm.
yes, they were asking for a demilitarized, self-governing. They use autonomous and self-governing, sometimes self-determination like language also, where the survivors and the refugees could just come together and sustain their culture and their religion in a congregated, self-segregated way. So they are asking for an unmixing of some sort.
Because that wasn't allowed before. So my question is, what really led to those demands? Was it the fact that they could not live as Armenians? I mean, there was some sort of suppression of their Armenian identity. And also a question of physical safety, because,
Right.
as you said, they lived next door to their perpetrators from just a few years before.
Yeah. I mean, what happened was that the massacres happened. Kidnapping happened. Kidnapping meaning a lot of Armenian women and children during the process of Turkish project of unmaking Armenianness in that land. A lot of people who were considered non-capable of passing identities, such as children and women, were transferred from the perpetrator group to from the target group to the perpetrator group, meaning they did become Kurds, Turks, Arabs, Muslims. Right? So they did not want these processes to continue because intermixing did not do them well, really.
Mm-hmm. And then, but the question is, if it is a question of safety, and again, I'm looking at this
Sure.
through my Zionist Israeli lens, because, the two things that led the Zionist project in tandem, more or less, was also, first of all, the need to find a safe haven for all the persecuted Jews around the world, and also a place to recreate themselves as a national collective. If we take the first one and apply it to the Armenian case, where does the Republic of Armenia factor in? Because the country that today we know as Armenia was for many years a Soviet state, had already been established in 1918. How did that fit into the whole debate?
Yeah, this is when it gets really complicated.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It doesn't have to be that complicated,
Okay.
but this is one of the times that we cannot extrapolate too much from Jewish history,
Yeah,
even though
yeah,
there
yeah.
is a lot of similarities between Jewish,
No,
Armenian
it's
history,
the outliers
Jewish,
that
Palestinian.
matter. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so Armenians have been living under what we call Western Armenians, which are the Armenians who speak Western Armenian, and they are the subjects of the Ottoman Empire, otherwise known as Turkish Armenians, sometimes Ottoman Armenians. They have been living under the Ottoman rule for more than 500 years but they congregate around what is called Eastern Anatolia, which to the Armenian is the western part of their ancestral homeland. They are indigenous to that part of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ararat Plateau, Armenian Plateau. And there are also Russian Armenians. And also there are Iranian Armenians. Armenians under different empires. Russian Armenians, during the chaos of the Bolshevik Revolution, they managed to declare independence, such like their neighbors Georgians and Azerbaijan, right? So from 1918 on, there is a tiny republic that de facto is independent, and it is called the Yerevan Republic many times. So when I said Greater Armenia, that post-genocide Armenians wanted to have a state of their own, what they have in mind is a unification with the Russian Armenian Yerevan Republic. So western and eastern parts of that promised land coming together, okay? However, because of the Treaty of Sèvres, August 1920, when the Allies do approve a place called Armenia, potentially later to be joined with Russian Armenian territories, not previously Russian.
Within Turkish territory, that is.
Yes, Turkish, we now call them Turkish.
Yes.
But previously Ottoman, these are eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire that had a significant Armenian presence before the genocide. So these parts were going to, in this ideal Greater Armenia version that kind of Sèvres Treaty endorsed, they were going to unite with the Yerevan Republic. This is why the Kemalists started their attack. They started the anti-Sèvres crusade by attacking this tiny Republic of Armenia first. And the Armenians resisted, but they got some...
To foil that project.
Exactly, to foil that project. And they were successful. And the result was that Armenia became a Soviet republic because the Bolsheviks also came and kind of rescued. There's different interpretations, but Armenians basically chose Sovietization over, once again, being under Turkish rule. So that Soviet Armenia, when we talk about Armenia today, that's the Soviet Armenia that we are talking about, where they speak Eastern Armenian.
Oh, it's a different language.
It's not a different language, but a different dialect. It's
yeah,
mutually legible.
Okay.
But they do come from, it's like Ashkenazi versus Mizrahi, more Sephardic, just style of difference.
But this basically perpetuated the Armenian problem in Turkey that later was being addressed at Lausanne 2 years later.
So, yes. What happened is that Muslims, mostly Kurds and Turks, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal, later Atatürk, waged a war against the Sèvres, which also included the Greek occupation of Asia Minor, a potential Kurdish territory, autonomous territory. And that treaty was cancelled. It was unmade, right? And it was endorsed by originally it was signed by the Istanbul Ottoman Sultanate government. Mustafa Kemal is the Ankara representative. They are the resistance revolutionaries. They call themselves revolutionaries.
Well, Republicans, right?
Yes. And they are not loyalists. They are the patriots.
No, it was a complete regime change. So it actually made sense that
regime change was happening. Regime change will happen after Lausanne. So we don't talk about...
Right, okay, sorry.
During Lausanne, no, we can call Ankara government, but they haven't yet declared the republic. But the point here is that Lausanne Conference happens because the Turks managed to win the war militarily on the ground. So they managed to bring a defeated group. Turks were defeated during World War I. Despite so, they won the next war, this anti-imperialist, they call it, war. This is the partitioning of Anatolia. And they brought all these victorious allies and the Americans around the negotiation table to Lausanne. And by that time, Armenians, because they are already defeated in every ground, post-genocide included, they just asked for this one tiny last territorial self-ruling type of an arrangement for themselves. And of course, Turks say no.
Yeah, but exactly. What were they thinking? I mean, they had been defeated on every front. In what position were they to even air this demand?
Yes, I've talked about this a lot, and I don't think they did it because they were stupid, first of all. I mean, because it does sound very naive. The very reason why the genocide happened was to prevent that possibility of Armenian territorial anything, really, including autonomy. So why would they give up? There was a lot of Western pro-Armenian feeling. Like, this is objectively true. Meaning Western, not at the state level, even the representative of allied powers at Lausanne paid lip service to various pro-Armenian causes, including the Armenian national home demand. None of them were going to go to war on behalf of Armenians. I mean, no one was ready to resume military operations on behalf of Armenians. But they had domestic constituencies at home who were all pro-Armenian. Missionaries. There is a lot of missionary activity amongst Armenians from America, from France. The British church, different churches are also involved in the Armenian cause because, like the Jews, again, the pogroms starting from 1890s against Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, and they are Christians, like unlike...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they do extend this discourse and material humanitarian help to Armenians from 1819 on, because Armenians are the first Christian nation. They're being persecuted under the Muslim barbarians type of a discourse. So they have that legacy. And I think for us to be able to understand that, I recently started thinking, I'm not recently, but since the Russian attack against Ukraine happened, I think at the time Armenians were like what we think of Ukrainians now. Like they're so the wronged party, right?
Well, there's a lot of sympathy. Yeah.
There is a lot of Western sympathy. So Armenian actors on the ground, also because what else are they going to do? Like, are they going to give up?
Yeah.
They will not give up.
So they try to capitalize on this sympathy.
They capitalize on anything that they can capitalize. They know that it will be difficult, but they think that even if we don't get our autonomous region, we'll get something else.
Before we get to the nitty-gritty of it, I'd like to ask you, I mean, the Lausanne conference was really about the future of Turkey. How prominently did the Armenian issue feature in it?
Not too prominently. In terms of like the number of hours that the deliberations took, Armenian issue wasn't a big deal. Mosul was a big deal. I mean, oil was a big, who is going to be, or like other issues pertaining to the straits, Turkish straits, like, because this is what Lausanne is called as the birth certificate of modern Turkey. This is when Turkey that we know was accepted to the family of nations as a legitimate actor. And so maybe a little bit of a correction here. For the Turkish side, the Armenian issue is very big. But they maneuver it in such a way that it doesn't take up too much time, specifically at Lausanne.
More than the Kurdish issue, more than the Greek issue? I mean, today it is. I mean, obviously, but I'm trying to think what it was like 100 years ago.
So the Ankara government give a 9-point to-do list type of a protocol to the Turkish delegation that left for Lausanne in early November. It's there, like there's 9 items. These are what we can compromise on. These are what you're not allowed to discuss even some of these topics. And the first topic the first item is an Armenian national home. They said that it is impossible. We will never agree to this. If they insist, if the allied powers, great powers, insist on discussing this, you can leave the conference even without asking us first. They are very scared that the allies will continue pushing. The way that they supported before the Sèvres Treaty. Because they are nervous, because they are insecure. Now we think of them as like they really won a lot of things at Lausanne, but at the time they don't know it yet. But the minorities issues, meaning non-Muslim minorities, it did take a lot of space and time at Lausanne. And this is another topic that I wrote extensively, so I'm more than happy to expand on it because it also involves Jews in a way. It's more. So the Lausanne treaty, the treaty that will be signed at the end of this one-year conference, recognizes non-Muslim nationals of Turkey, by which we mean Armenians, Greeks, and Jews, and Assyrians to a certain extent, to have certain kind of minority rights and protections. The Turkish side tried not to give those rights. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that if minorities have rights, they will be seen as privileged subjects, like they used to be in the Ottoman times. And we will not be able to treat them as equal because they will be different enough.
It's sort of undermining the Republican vision of, complete equality.
Yes. And they have the French model as the right model. Basically, they give the example at some point later. They give, not at Lausanne, but right after, they give the example of French Jewry, for instance. Like French Jewry, they don't speak another language. They only speak French. They don't have their schools. Therefore, they deserve to be called French because they gave up on their like public expressions of Jewishness. At home, they can be Jew, whatever, they can go to their synagogue. But so they want Turkish Jews, Armenians, and Greeks to be like that. But the Allies push minority protections on them. I mean, to this day, Lausanne is alive, and Armenian Greeks and Jews in Turkey have these rights. That's why they have their schools and everything. But the reason they push these rights, minority protections on these groups, is that Allies pushed similar rights on 15 other defeated or newly expanded states, from Romania to Poland to Czechoslovakia, Kingdom of Serbs and others, to protect the Jews mostly in these lands.
It didn't work out very well in the interwar period.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what my book is about. Yeah.
But in Turkey it did, you're saying?
Depends on what you mean by... I mean, they were not massacred en masse, again, that's true. But there were pogroms against Jews in Turkey in 1934, for instance. Even though they were technically protected, they were not protected de facto on the ground. Having said that, Turkey did not breach all of these Lausanne articles, such as schools and religious spaces. We do have them still in Turkey.
Mm-hmm. But the main demand, which was some sort of a demilitarized area where they can congregate away from, and it's for, I said autonomy earlier and you jumped, so I won't say it again, but it's some sort of like, maybe not a nation state, but some sort of like an area of national existence, separate from the broader Turkish state, even though it's still under its aegis, and that this is something that the Turks would have nothing to do with.
No, Turks said that we are going to wage a war against you if you insist on this mess. At Lausanne, Armenians were not an official delegation partaking in the conversations. This is also...
But why were they so adamantly opposed to it? I mean, as we said, there's like this Republican ideology, but it feels to me like there's something more to it. Did they feel still threatened by the Armenians even after the genocide?
Yes, and they are still threatened by the Armenians after more than a century.
Why is that?
Because the shadow of it is too long, because they know what they did. I mean, Talat has
no, but the shadow of the genocide. But what about the Armenians who were still there? I mean, the survivors and the community, the broken communities that were left after the genocide.
So many of them were not there, actually. Overwhelming majority of Armenians alive, like the survivors, were already outside of Turkey at that time. So it would mean that they would have to bring back the leftovers. And they knew that this would lead into some kind of calls in the future to possibly unite with that Soviet Armenia, right? Or some kind of, it would, I mean, I grew up in Turkey in the 90s, in anti-Kurdish environment. This was a question that I've asked myself growing up. I mean, Kurds want some kind of autonomy, some kind of self-rule. Why don't we give that to them, right? Because they are also still there, unlike Armenia. Because for Armenians, it's just you cannot people that much land also. Genocides are irreversible, right? For the Kurds, they were not genocided. So there was enough people, actually, but Turkey never, ever never gave up on this idea that if we give them a little bit of autonomy, they will totally want more, and they will just have their
Give them an inch, they'll want a whole mile. We've heard it so many times in so many different contexts.
Yeah, and it's an imperial. Turks are the imperial power here. They don't want decolonization, basically.
But as you said, they didn't know it back then yet.
They don't know it back then, but they have enough muscle memory not to let it happen, right?
Yeah. So going back to the national home, and you said that the Armenians were not official delegates at Lausanne, even though there was some representation there, also of a different kind, as you write in your papers, a whole panorama of sympathetic organizations from NGOs to other international diplomats pushing the Armenian cause. Other representatives that were there at Lausanne, also unofficially, were Zionist representatives. And I would like to ask whether this whole question of national home, did they have a lot to talk about? I mean, were they aware of each other? Did they exchange any ideas, whether it was ideologues or political leaders?
This is a good question. I haven't explored it yet, and I don't think anyone did. But just even the diplomatic genealogy of what is called the Jewish national home and how much of it Armenians borrowed from that language, I don't know yet. I mean, this topic, the Armenian demand for an autonomy, interestingly, hasn't been, I mean, not very interesting. I know there are political and historical reasons for it, but hasn't been studied as such. It's one of those things that I think like the connection has to be, or the Irish home rule. Like Armenians are making cases that they would like to be the Irish to the British. Like if Turks accept this dominion, they call it, we can be a dominion to you. And if you have a dominion, it's so prestigious. Why don't you have, like they're trying to sell this in any way they can. They consider it as a stamp of civilization. So if you accept us having this autonomous region, you will be seen, they're saying to the Turkish parties that you will, I mean, through the allies, that you will prove that you are not like this previous Ottoman Islamic quote-unquote barbarian group that chopped up the Armenians, but now you're extending them a tolerant hand and like allowing them to live amongst you so you can be seen as the new face of Turkey that's worth being part of that new modern civilization. It doesn't pass for various reasons, obviously, but yeah, the Zionists, I mean, Jews in Lausanne from Turkey, Turkish Jews in Lausanne, they are supporting the Turkish case, the Turkish Ankara government, because they are betting that they will have to go with whoever is in charge. Historically, that's how they functioned and existed in the Ottoman Empire and post-Ottoman Turkey. But the Zionists, I don't know. However, there are some discussion about like San Remo and previous conference, because between Sèvres and Lausanne, between Mudros Armistice and Lausanne, there were different conferences, San Remo and London, where the Jews are also present.
Yeah. I mean, this is something, a question that I did not prepare, but you just said something. Were the Turkish Jews, did they make any, community leaders or political leaders, any expressions about the Armenian demand and the Armenian question, or was it also like a politics of minorities, stay away from these very controversial topics?
Yeah, not just stay away, but they did support the Turkish case against the Armenian case.
Because,
because it's a calculus game of like, what are they going, their community will benefit, right? Like this is, and there is now new research on this in terms of like how Jewish position vis-a-vis the Ottoman ruling class had to rest on denial of the Armenian genocide, really. Yeah. During the not the Ottoman, sorry, the Turkish rulers, Turkish governing bodies post-genocide. So they did perform the loyal, accommodating, ready to be of service minority to the Sultan.
Yeah, which actually also echoes, we talked about France earlier. It really also echoes the political game that the French Jews were playing vis-a-vis other, well, in that case, Muslim minorities to this day, actually.
Yeah.
The sort of loyal minority.
Yeah. I mean, Armenians post-1923 imitate those. They all have to. Right. I call it in my book this reincarnated dhimmi standpoint, because the Turkish Republic expected a similar kind of like loyal, theatrical almost like show of loyalty from them. Otherwise, they are punished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The conference that is taking place at the Hebrew University is dedicated to the Lausanne model, suggesting that it made some theoretical contribution to diplomacy and conflict resolution beyond the specific case that it was trying to address. Now, as a historian, I'd like to ask you, what would you say is really the importance of Lausanne, theoretically, more broadly, more universally, to the way the 20th century unfolded?
Yeah, the title, when we talk about in this context about the Lausanne model, we have mostly the Greek-Turkish exchange of populations. This happened.
Which was also part of Lausanne.
Yes. part of Lausanne, the Lausanne Treaty authorized a compulsory exchange of populations between Greek Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire and Muslim subjects of Greek Hellenic citizenship in Greece. So they had to switch homes, basically, homelands, to fit in, align the identity to be aligned with the state titular identity. This is the first compulsory exchange of populations that is sanctioned, approved by the international law. So this is a giant event when it comes to a history of international law. And one of the reasons why we are having this conference in Israel is that population transfers have been a huge deal in the way that Israel was built, and the Zionists thought about what to do with the populations in general. But populations.
And
right?
population swaps are still on the table in one way or another.
Of course.
Yeah.
So Zionists studied the Greek, during the interwar era, the Greek-Turkish exchange of populations, which was a solution to the problem of unmixing, to the problem of violence and heterogeneity and groups not being able to live together peacefully, right? How to assure peace? You assure peace by dividing them and not letting them play together, basically, like children, Everyone in their own corner, minimized, legalized interactions, peace in the long term. Because we are all talking about League of Nations supported. The League of Nations was established around this time in 1920. And the whole goal is not to prevent another war.
Mm-hmm.
So this type of peacemaking was appealing to many groups, including some groups of Zionists. I don't know this history too much, and I'm looking forward to learning about it. But obviously, I know enough that it was seen as a successful way of pushing populations away. And then it is seen also as a genealogy, like a beginning for partitions to come from Israel, Palestine, from 47 India-Pakistan partition. This logic would be employed in
But
various
going
places.
back to Soviet Armenia,
Yes.
Wasn't the idea suggested then to just relocate all the Armenians within the Republic of Turkey to the so-called Armenian homeland?
The post-Turkish War of Independence, militarily victorious Kemalists did not want any non-Muslims amongst them because especially Christians, but Jews too, because they see them as potentially treasonous.
Yeah, fifth column.
But they did in the post-genocide after they kind of are, because they made them with genocide, right? Like how
it's
can
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is it's the summary of everything really here, which is very sad actually. So this group in the 9-point protocol that Ankara gave to the departing delegation for Lausanne, they said that for every minority, all minorities, we need to exchange them. But the head of the Turkish delegation at Lausanne couldn't even start discussing the topic of exchanging Turkish Armenians with Tatars and Azeris in Soviet Armenia at the time because they did not want to, the Ankara government did not want to engage the Soviets into conversations about because Turks see this as their internal domestic affairs, because they already signed a treaty, Moscow Treaty, that could potentially open up the discussion of renegotiating the borders. So to be able to keep the Soviet leadership away from these conversations, they couldn't talk about exchange of Armenians, which is very bad for them because they had to live with some Armenians, which they really didn't want to, and that's why they did see them as unfinished business in Turkey.
To what extent is the Lausanne Treaty still alive today in the debate in Turkey?
Like legally, it is alive.
Mm-hmm. No, but when you address the Armenian issue, does it come up?
Not too well. There's so much happening in Turkey now with regards to Lausanne. There are a lot of conspiracy theories. Like, not many people will think about Armenians when they think about Lausanne today.
Right.
They think about oil and Mosul, and like who has Kurdish regions, and who has the power. So there is a lot of conspiracy theories that there are secret articles of Lausanne that will be unveiled once the 100th anniversary deadline is over.
Oh, that's next month.
It is next month, 24th of July. Yeah, so they are waiting for it. I think Erdogan has been misusing, appropriating Lausanne for various different kind of goals. Armenia is not part of it at all.
But the conspiracy theory is that all these oil-rich places were taken away from Turkey by those greedy British, right?
The greedy British, and that they were taken away. By the way, it is true. The British were greedy, and because of the oil reserves, they did.
No, that's the thing about conspiracy theory. There's always a kernel of truth in them. Yeah.
Yes, but it's taken to. There are no secret treaties. The idea is that once these secret treaties are real, we'll get back our Lausanne, our Mosul, and our oil. And this is the new. And now we know the winning narrative of Turkey as the victim. Yeah. Like they've wronged us. And then now, I mean, Hagia Sophia, the reconversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque, for instance, happened on a 24th of July, the same day that Lausanne was.
Right.
Yeah. So
on purpose, right? It wasn't.
They never admitted it, but what are the chances?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. This is all very interesting. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today, Professor. Let me see if I get this right. Lerna Ekmekcioglu.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilad.
And many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app, and we have a special request. Please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has probably close to 1,000 interviews in there. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.